A natural med isn't just a substance you take. It is a lifestyle that one lives to amplify their health. We don't always choose how long we will be on this planet, but we can take action on the quality of life that we wish to enjoy.
The Natural Med podcast interviews different professionals and experts who look at improving the quality of health so they can live a more fulfilling life. Whether that be physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, or spiritually, we discover the secrets to their own journey and the small steps individuals can take on a daily basis to improve the quality of their life. Come with me as we travel, research, and discover how we can make incremental changes on a daily basis to live a more fulfilled and balanced life.
Hey there, welcome back to another episode of the Natural Med podcast. I am Nathan, I am one of the hosts, and we are here with Nicole Wright, our fearless leader, who is amazing. And we have a special guest today talking about pelvic floor health. It's Danyell, and we want you to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Awesome.
Thank you for being
welcome,
here,
Danyell. I am so excited to be here. So I am Dr. Danyell Russell, and I am a pelvic floor physical therapist. I have been a physical therapist for about 8 years, and I took a dive into pelvic floor about 2 years ago. Between my first and second pregnancy, I became very active and into CrossFit, and I wanted to be able to continue to do that during my pregnancy. And so and I'm sure that you guys know there's a lot of information out there about exercise and pregnancy, and some of it's good information, some of it's not so great information. So that's kind of where I took some courses kind of related to that and kind of guided me down the path to become a pelvic floor PT. And I've been doing that for about 2 years, and I have not looked back since. I love it. It's so much fun. I love being able to empower women to be able to continue to exercise during pregnancy well. Again, there's so much information out there, and some of it's good.
Yeah.
Some of it's not so good. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me. I own Strong Foundation Physical Therapy, and that's been my baby for about 2 years. And I am mobile. I go to my clients in their home, and that's a little bit about me. I'm sure that we'll dive a little bit more into it, too.
We definitely will.
Yeah. That's awesome. So you were mentioning about pregnancy and everything. I've had 2 babies of my own, and I know how that is, being pregnant and the whole process and the delivery process. But is pelvic floor physical therapy something you do just after pregnancy, or like while you're pregnant, or how's the process?
So I love being able to see women during their pregnancy, because their bodies are changing so much during pregnancy.
Oh, yeah.
And so if we can get them going on a good program while they're pregnant and start preparing their bodies for those changes that are happening, as well as preparing them for birth and that postpartum period, like giving them idealistic expectations of what's going to happen during birth and what that postpartum period is going to feel like, then that really sets them up for a better postpartum period.
Yeah.
So I see anybody throughout pregnancy that I would love for every single woman to see me throughout pregnancy.
Yeah.
And then especially in postpartum, I'm a firm believer that birth should be treated as an injury, and that's how we should be thinking about it. Like, it's not, you're not disabled during pregnancy, and it's not that you are unable to do things during pregnancy, but we should be thinking about it as an injury, and how do we rehab that back? You wouldn't rehab, or you wouldn't go back from like an ACL tear without seeing a trained professional to help you rehab that, and you really shouldn't be doing that with pregnancy, labor, and delivery either. And so that's kind of like my mindset on that. So I see people as early as they want to in pregnancy, and preferably kind of throughout that entire process.
Yeah. So, and for women who have, not just like natural childbirth, but also maybe get a cesarean section, do you maybe help those women as well?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
I like to say that a C-section does not really spare your pelvic floor.
Yeah.
You still were pregnant for 9 months. You still or 9-ish months, depending on why you had a cesarean. So it doesn't really matter the mode of delivery. Your pelvic floor isn't necessarily spared during that situation. And I also like to say that even though I'm a pelvic floor PT, I'm not just looking at the pelvic floor. Your abdominal muscles are a critical part of that picture as well as the mechanics at your hips, your knees, your ankles, your back. And so a C-section is a major surgery.
Yes.
And I know you know that,
Yeah.
but it's a major surgery and you're going through multiple layers of tissue. And so we should be thinking of that as even like more of a reason for a woman to seek help after a C-section, because
definitely.
it's a major surgery.
Yeah, and those abdominal muscles too are separated, and sometimes
Absolutely.
it takes a while for those to come back.
Yep.
And and with the pelvic floor muscles and everything.
sure.
I mean, I know myself, it took I think almost a year
Yep.
for my abdominal muscles to completely come back.
Yep. And that's kind of what I tell people is like 9 months to a year is a pretty on point timeline for like feeling like back to normal and whatever normal is. But like, that's like, if you were an athlete prior to pregnancy, like you can expect that it's going to take 9 months to a year for you to really feel like you're back to the same capacity that you were at pre-pregnancy.
Definitely.
So,
oh yeah, for sure.
That
and
6 week timeline is bogus.
Yeah, it really is, because it does. It sometimes does take a full another 9 months or year to get your body back completely
Absolutely.
to how it is. Do you ever, I know, like pre and postpartum, do you ever deal with women who had a baby maybe like 10 years ago
sure.
or a while? And how is the rehab process with that? Is it a little bit harder? Or?
It's just different.
Yeah.
So like you're approaching things from a little bit different perspective because you're not thinking of things from like necessarily an acute perspective. You're dealing with issues that maybe happened 10, 12, 20 years ago, depending on how far postpartum they are. And pelvic floor issues aren't necessarily exclusive to women who have had babies either. As we were talking about a little bit before the show, men also have pelvic floors. And so just because you've never had a baby doesn't necessarily mean that your pelvic floor is functioning at its optimal capacity
And everything. Yeah, definitely.
Since you mentioned men, I have a question for you. First, let me say, when I looked at your flyer, I failed to see that you're a doctor, which is super awesome.
Well, thank you.
So, doctor, what got you into specializing in pelvic floor health?
Yeah, so I mentioned a little bit in the intro that I was an athlete and I wanted to be able to continue that being in the CrossFit gym and being able to be in that space during my pregnancy. And so I took courses that were kind of like selfish in nature. Like I wanted to be able to continue to do what I was doing at the highest capacity I could, but also safely. And at that point I was like, man, this is so cool. I love this. This is awesome. And this is the people that I want to serve. Right. I want to be able to help women feel empowered to continue to be in that space, be able to continue to work out at a high capacity with still setting themselves up for a good postpartum period. Because I think that we've had like this pendulum shift of like, don't do anything during pregnancy or do yoga or walk or like, the bare minimum. And then we've had this shift to like, you just do everything that you want to. It's totally fine. Like you can deal with the ramifications after. And I'm like, but like, wait, hold on. Like there's somewhere in the middle where you can continue to exercise at a really high capacity. And I continued to exercise all the way throughout my pregnancy. And I was at the CrossFit gym on my due date with my most recent baby. And so that was kind of the reason why I got into pelvic health, is because I have 2 kids and I feel like there's some great information out there about how to continue to exercise during pregnancy. But then there's some really not good information and just surrounding women's health in general, but then especially like what things look like during pregnancy, what things should look like during pregnancy, and how to get back to things postpartum. And so that's where I really wanted to like step into that space and be able to change the world one pelvic floor at a time.
So do you feel like in your years of experience doing this now that you have kind of formulated a happy medium?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think that so I've taken a lot of great courses through the Institute of Clinical Excellence, which is a continuing education group for physical therapists that are developed for fitness athletes.
Right.
And they have a wonderful, wonderful course that is for the pregnant and postpartum athlete. And again, it's from a physical therapy standpoint, but essentially that helped me to like be able to take skills and like find scales for them that are appropriate for different stages of pregnancy. And so like you may not be able to do an Olympic lift at the end of your pregnancy, but you probably could do something that looks very similar to it. And so the idea behind it is like scaling as much as necessary, but as little as possible.
Right.
So you're still kind of keeping up with that same stimulus of the workout or whatever it is that the person does. So not everybody does CrossFit, obviously, but like being able to keep that same stimulus for the fitness athlete versus also being able to like make sure that they're doing it well and being respectful of their pregnant or postpartum body.
Right. Okay.
Awesome. So kind of how does somebody get started on, getting physical therapy for their pelvic floor? Do they need a referral from their primary care doctor, or how does one go about starting this?
So in the state of Texas, we can initiate physical therapy for 10 days. And then after that, we need a referral from a physician for traditional physical therapy services. Now, I will also sometimes transition people to more of a like wellness program if they're not having issues with like pelvic pain or incontinence or things like that. And it's really just kind of about like building up their core or their pelvic floor, the strength kind of components or like the skill components, then we can transition into more of like a wellness program. And then they don't have to have a referral from a physician. But unfortunately for traditional physical therapy services in the state of Texas, even though I'm a doctor, that I still have to have a referral from a PCP or OBGYN, midwife, chiropractor, which is silly to me that like we have the same, anyway, that's a whole different soapbox issue, but we'll leave that one alone. I love chiropractors, but I think that it's funny that they can refer to physical therapy, even though we're the same qualifications. Anyway, I'll leave that one alone. That's for another time.
It is interesting though, but it's good to know how people can get started if they're looking into something like this. So
absolutely.
So now we want to get into the good stuff.
Oh yes, let's go.
You were mentioning earlier about, different advice and different things. So, there's good stuff out there.
Sure.
You didn't say there's bad stuff out there, but I knew what you were saying. But the question is, what are some common misconceptions about pelvic floor health?
That Kegels cure everything.
They don't?
That is the literal worst advice that anybody can give anybody is to just do Kegels for your whatever XYZ problem. Yeah. Because one, unless you've actually assessed somebody's pelvic floor, you have no idea whether Kegels are appropriate for them. Secondarily, you have no idea if this person is doing them correctly.
Right.
And if you don't need them and you're ending up with too much tension in your pelvic floor, you can actually make those symptoms worse. Okay. Or if you're not doing them correctly, you certainly aren't doing yourself any favors. Right. And so I almost never give somebody Kegels to do. And it is certainly not like, hey, we're just going to do Kegels and that's it. Like, I'm very much about looking at the person and their pelvic floor and like what's going on. Is it a coordination issue? Is it a true strength issue? Is it because you have too much tension on board? Like what is the reason that you're having these pelvic floor symptoms? And it's not always in the pelvis that is causing those issues either. Right. Can be also that you have some malalignments in your feet, in your knees, your hips, your back. And so I think that is probably the number one misconception is that Kegels cure everything. And I know you probably have had this experience. Like you go into your OBGYN or whatever, and they're like, "Are you doing your Kegels?" And I'm like, "Can we just stop asking women if they're doing Kegels, because they should not be."
Yeah. So what do you recommend instead of Kegels? So I know it depends on the person, of course. Absolutely. Everybody's different. But
you need your pelvic floor to be able to contract on demand and also relax. And so your pelvic floor has a range of motion just like any other muscle in the body. And so a lot of times when people are doing Kegels a lot, what will happen is they're basically walking around like they're walking around with a bicep curl all day long. And so they're they're constantly contracting. Well, what happens whenever they need to use that effectively? They have to relax it, right? But if they don't know how to relax it, if they're constantly just like flexing, then they aren't able to use that functionally. And so then they have a breakdown in their ability to use their pelvic floor to hold things in that we want to hold in, like, pee, poop, gas. And then so they have that pressure gradient that they're unable to tolerate any more pressure, and so they leak, or they have issues with like constipation or pain with intercourse because they're walking around again with that bicep curl that they can't relax. Yeah. And so they can't use their pelvic floor functionally. And so my recommendation is always if you are going to do a pelvic floor contraction, make sure that you are also doing that reciprocal relaxation. That way you are always getting that full range of motion of your pelvic floor. And that would be one really big one. Also 360 breathing, which is basically being able to fully breathe into your abdominal wall, your rib cage expands, and your diaphragm and your pelvic floor kind of move in tandem with one another.
Right. When you breathe, inhale and exhale.
Exactly. Yeah. As long as you're getting that good big breath. But a lot of us are chest breathers, and so we don't really get that full belly expansion, and therefore we're also not getting that reciprocal relaxation of the pelvic floor as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, that's a big misconception because Kegels are pushed so much, whenever you're pregnant and when you see your gynecologist, they're like, make sure you're doing your Kegels.
Are you doing your Kegels? I'm like, no, you should not be. So like I'll do like workshops and that's one of the things that I'll say, like as I'm kind of going on, I'm like, and by the way, if you're doing Kegels, please stop, like now. Yeah. And you can like see everybody's just like relax. And I'm like, okay, like seriously, guys, stop. But yeah.
So we also touched on this at the beginning too, when Nicole was talking about it, about men needing, help with their pelvic floor as well. What are some areas or I guess symptoms that would be benefited by pelvic floor health? For and your prostate, abdomen surgery, ED, things like that, sports injuries.
Oh, for sure.
Can you elaborate on some of those things and kind of?
Yeah. So I'm actually not a PT that specializes in men's health. Okay. But I know some really good ones out there if you guys need any referrals. But painful intercourse, pain with an erection, or also leaking. Typically men are more likely to leak gas versus urine. They have a little bit more of a length of they have the penis there to be able to stop a little bit of that more readily than women do. And so but after like a prostate surgery or something like that, they are more likely to leak urine. And so constipation is another one both for men and women, would be another like, hey, we probably should get this checked out. Pain with sitting for long periods of time. Back pain can also be a sign of pelvic floor dysfunction because, again, like you can't really separate the back from the pelvis. It's literally right here. And so you have all of these, there's also muscular connections between the back and the pelvic floor as well. This is a female pelvis, but also men look similar to this.
Little differences, but
some subtle differences. But yeah, so again, that's not really my specialty, but definitely things that there are definitely men who also deal with pelvic floor dysfunction as well. So, but ED is another one as well. Yeah.
So you were talking about different physical therapy exercises and things you can do instead of Kegels. Is there any other therapies that are out there that maybe you offer? I've heard about different laser therapies. Sure. Can you go in a little bit more detail about that?
So I also offer cupping.
Oh, okay.
And dry needling. Cool. Both not just for pelvic floor. I'm also an ortho PT as well, and so I see basically everything. Cupping is basically you are separating those tissues away from one another and drawing blood to that area. I like to use that a lot for post C-section over the scar. Once it's well healed, to kind of separate those tissues away from each other and not have so much of that adhesion.
The scar tissue and everything.
Yep, Yep. And so I love using cupping, and then dry needling is another one of the things that I really like using. And essentially I'm using acupuncture style needles to go into the muscles that you're having trouble with. I do that with the pelvic floor, not directly into the
sensitive areas.
Yeah,
okay.
But I am able to go around through, and mostly they're able to stay clothed while I'm doing that. So especially around the tailbone, a lot of people will have tailbone pain, and I can get into some of those muscles that are right around the tailbone to help to relax those tissues.
Oh wow, really? That's awesome. That's really cool to know.
Yes. Yes.
I didn't even know that was an option. I mean, I've heard of dry needling and everything and cupping, but I didn't realize that you can specialize it to certain areas. That's awesome.
Yep.
That's cool. Do you do any of the type of laser therapies or anything?
I don't. I'm fully mobile. Everything that I have can fit in my car and go with me.
That's awesome.
And so the more equipment that I have, the more challenging it is to take everything with me. So from a tool perspective, I basically have my treatment table. I have a little caddy that has all of my needling stuff in it and samples of different lubricants and things, because that's important as well.
Oh, yes.
Just in case you were wondering.
It is important.
Yes.
Lube is important.
Yes, lube is so important.
What happened to this podcast?
Nathan's over there
why am I here? My little bag of cups and that sort of thing. So everything that I use, basically, I can throw in my car. If I am working with a CrossFit athlete, I can throw my barbell in the back of my car. I have an adjustable kettlebell that I can do the same thing with. And so I try to keep everything as mobile as possible and not have a lot of tools, if that makes sense.
Too much stuff and everything. Exactly. So do you deal with a lot of athletes and a lot of sports injuries?
I do. So I am a member of a CrossFit gym, and I also, so that's kind of my other niche is working with CrossFit athletes.
Yeah.
And so, and athletes of all kind, but I really love working with barbell athletes specifically.
Yeah.
So
awesome. That's cool.
Yeah.
So, tell us about I know everybody's different and everything, but what's an average I guess rehab treatment span for somebody, maybe a couple weeks, couple months? What are most people going through with their rehab time frame?
And again,
everybody's different.
Everyone's different.
Yes.
Generally, I don't see my clients for more than about between like 4 and 8 visits.
Okay.
Usually they're doing pretty well
Yeah.
at that point. Sometimes we'll transition more to a wellness program, just kind of depending on how they're doing. But for the most part, my clients, I mean, I've seen people for as few as like 1 or 2 sessions, and they're like, oh my gosh, everything feels so much better.
Yeah.
And then there are some people that I have to see for longer. And it just kind of depends on what we're dealing with and things like that. But kind of that 4 to 6, 8 sessions is pretty common.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's good.
So, Danyell, what is something that both men and women can do on a daily basis to improve pelvic floor health?
Yeah. So
Not Kegels, though.
Not Kegels. Yep.
Not Kegels.
So that 360 breathing is super important, because really getting that full excursion of the pelvic floor is really great to help to start to let some of those tissues expand. And again, we spend very little time relaxing as a whole. As humans, especially in this society, we spend very little time relaxing, and we're always kind of like on a sympathetic overdrive. And so if we can do something to like get ourselves more grounded, that is super helpful for not just our pelvic floor, but for us as a whole. Right. And so that 360 breathing is great. I love that a lot. I also recommend a lot of like guided relaxation, because again, I think that a lot of our issues stem from the fact that we live in that sympathetic overdrive, and we're not pursuing healthy lifestyle behaviors. Right. And because we're not pursuing healthy lifestyle behaviors, then our bodies are just not set up for being able to handle stress, not able to handle whenever we get sick. So when we aren't pursuing those healthy lifestyle behaviors, exercise, nutrition, being able to manage stress well, like when we're not doing those things, then sleeping well, that's another big one. When we're not doing those things, we are much more likely to fall into that like chronic pain cycle of like, I'm in pain, and because I'm in pain, I'm stressed out, and because I'm stressed out from work, it's increasing my pain. And so we kind of get into that like chronic issue. Yeah. And so if we address those lifestyle behaviors, then we would have a lot fewer instances of these chronic type behaviors that are in diseases and conditions that kind of hang out and create more problems.
Yeah.
That was a great answer. That was exactly what I was looking for.
No, that's good. I mean, we definitely talk about that a lot on this podcast, about having like a total balance of the different aspects of your health and everything, because it's all interconnected.
Yes.
And I feel like a lot of times people get so focused on, I need to like just exercise. If I can exercise every day, but then, their diet's not that great, or they're doing all these things, they're, trying to diet and exercise, but mentally their mental health isn't good, then it's all connected. Like it's all connected. And that's awesome that you focus on, the whole person. Pelvic health is important.
Yes. But it's not the only thing.
But it's not the only thing, and there's other things involved in everything.
One of the instructors from the courses that I like to take says to take your meds, and the M stands for meditation, E is exercise, D is diet, and S is sleep. And so if you aren't doing those things, then you're going to have to more than likely take some medicine. And then so like if we're not addressing those lifestyle behaviors, then we as healthcare practitioners are doing our clients a disservice by not addressing those things. And so I'm asking those questions all the time about like, how are you doing from a mental health perspective? How are you doing from an exercise? What does your nutrition look like? Are you sleeping? If you have a newborn, the answer to that question is probably no.
Yeah.
And so some of the other things that we're doing are going to have to change a little bit, because if we're not recovering well, then we probably should not be going and pushing it in the gym, because our body is not well equipped to do that.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that was Little side note.
That's
but
awesome. I love that acronym, MEDS.
Yeah.
Like, that's, the Natural Med Podcast. So
Yes.
I wonder if it's trademarked. I'm going to be thinking
Justin
about
Dunaway.
that.
I will give him credit.
Yeah,
Justin Dunaway.
Who is it? Justin Dunaway?
Yes.
Thank you,
Yes.
Justin Dunaway. That's
Yes.
an awesome acronym. I love it.
Yes, he is awesome.
I will
Awesome.
give him credit.
Yes.
So how do we find out more about your services and everything and you?
So I am on Facebook and Instagram. My my handle is at Strong Foundation PTTX, and then my web address is that same strongfoundationpttx.com. And then I'd be happy to put my any of my contact information up for anybody who would like to learn more. I offer a free discovery call for all of my incoming clients. I want to know that they're a good fit for me and that I'm a good fit for them before we get started, because I think that that's so important. I'm not necessarily everybody's cup of tea, and that is okay.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that I'm a good fit for them before they spend the money and the time to work with me. And so I'm pretty adamant about having that discovery call before we get started. So
make sure it's going to be a good relationship and everything.
Yes.
So I like it.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was great. Lots of great information and things we didn't know about pelvic floor health. So
I love it. I love sharing.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Danyell, for being a part of this.
Yep.
Thank you, viewers and listeners, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Bye.